I want to tell you about something that happened to me a little over a year ago. So this was late July 2022. I had a physical experience that I never had before. I started to feel like this fuzziness in my chest and in my upper arms, and my head was swooning, and I was having difficulty breathing. So I had to sit down. I felt like my vision was kind of closing in on me, and something is wrong. Now, if I sat and I breathed for a few minutes, I could get it to go away, and I was okay again. But every time I exerted myself physically, then it would start to come back. So I called the doctor, and I made an appointment for the very next day to go in and see what was going on, what was wrong with me. So I went in the next day, and they asked me a lot of questions, and didn't really come up with a whole lot. I think they hammered my knee or something. That didn't do anything. They didn't know what to do, so they took a blood test, maybe another test, I can't remember, and they sent me home and said, we'll call you with the results. So, very next day, this is where it gets a little weird. Very next day, I got a call from the doctor, and the doctor was a little panicky in his voice. He said, we got the results back from your blood test, and it shows that you had a heart attack yesterday. This seems a little strange. Has this happened to anybody else? You're just sitting at home feeling fine, and you get a phone call that says you had a heart attack yesterday? So I was confused by this. And he said, you need to go to the ER right now. And so you don't argue with the doctor who says that, right? So I grabbed my keys, and my wife said, no, you should probably take an Uber. Don't drive yourself to the emergency room. So yeah, that's wisdom. So I got an Uber or a Lyft to take me to North Kansas City Hospital so I could admit myself and say, the doctor says I had a heart attack, so here I am, right? So they processed me. I didn't wait very long in the waiting room. I think heart attacks are high priority, I suppose. But even though I was walking and feeling fine. So they put me on into a hospital room and hooked me up to like 18 things, and I'm sitting there, people coming in and out, right, trying to figure out what to do with me. And eventually, I had a cardiologist that came in, because they ran all the same tests again, and when you're in the ER, you get those test results back right away. You don't have to wait till the next day. So they did all the same tests again. Cardiologist came in. He said, I have no idea. I don't know why you're here. He said, nothing in your test results indicates that you could possibly have had a heart attack yesterday. None of this, the only thing we can conclude is that it was an error. There was an erroneous test the day before. So I'm like, well, that's just great. That's good news and bad news kind of rolled into one, right? A, I'm fine, but B, what am I doing here? So it was an absurdly long time. It was like 5 hours for nothing, right? And even after they said they were going to discharge me, I feel like it still took maybe 2.5 hours to actually get it done. So that was annoying and inconvenient, but it gave me a lot of time to think. And to think about, well, what's going on in my body? What message is my body trying to send me right now by doing this? And the only thing that I could conclude as I thought about it is that it was some kind of panic attack that I had had. And I've heard about panic attacks before. I know they happen with anxiety and with various other disorders or other difficulties, but what was going on in me? I mean, I'm not a workaholic. I feel like I'm a hard worker, but I limit my hours to reasonable human amounts, I think, and I wasn't overworked. I didn't have a toxic workplace or any kind of toxic environment in my life that I knew of. I mean, raising 2 little ones can be intense and challenging sometimes, but it all seemed to be going in a reasonable, healthy way in my life, so what is happening here? But I did have that time to reflect back on the last few years in my life. And I thought about my discernment process, and I thought about seminary, and I thought about ordination and the time after seminary, and how really for the last 7 years or so, I've been trying to fit a certain mold, trying to meet up to the expectations that people have had for me. And when I very first voiced that at Christ Episcopal Church in Springfield, Missouri, when I said, I might want to become an Episcopal priest. And as soon as people start taking that seriously, they treat you a little differently, and they make sure you know that you're being held not just to a higher standard, but a very specific persona. Like, well, this is what an Episcopal priest is supposed to be according to us, right? Now, I don't fault any of them for that. This is just what we were handed, right? And I'm sure all of us have some degree of that in us when we look at a police officer or a doctor or a priest or a teacher, any of those people. We have ideas about what that person is supposed to be like. And I wouldn't have gone through this process if I felt like that was unreasonable, or if I felt like they were putting some sort of crazy demands on me. I felt like this was something that I could do. And, I did convince a bishop that I could do it. And I did convince Christ Episcopal Church to support me on my way to seminary. And we did sell our house and move 1,000 miles. And I did well in my classes. And I wrote a master's thesis, and I got ordained as a deacon and then a priest. I bought 4 suits and 14 clerical shirts and the collars and everything. Got a class cross. I'm checking all the boxes, But then there comes a point where I have to ask myself whether I am actually in alignment or out of alignment. Am I living according to what God made me to be and how God made me to be? Or have I somehow missed that track? And that's where that word in Isaiah really hits me hard. It says, "Remember the rock from which you were hewn, the quarry from which you were dug." And yes, that means to think about God, our Creator, and God having made us in the divine image, but I think it means something a little more than that. At least in that moment it did to me. Remember where I come from. Remember who I was made to be. Am I walking in that path? Am I flowing in that stream, or am I outside of it somehow? Because if you're outside of it, you may not notice here, but eventually your body is going to tell you. And I think that may be what my body was telling me. And I wonder if anybody here can relate to that. If you have been through something in your life or going through something in your life right now that you feel like, why am I doing this? Am I upholding somebody else's standards by doing this? Am I making someone else happy? Am I trying to fit a certain persona and check all of someone else's boxes? And maybe that means overwork. For some people, that means you're working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week to the point of exhaustion and burnout and maybe even panic attacks. Or for others, that might mean that you're just not doing what you want to do. You're not into it. You wake up every morning, you get it done, you go to sleep, but you have not been yourself. And I think that question of identity, asking ourselves who we are and who we were made to be, I think Jesus is zeroing right in on that in this morning's gospel. When he asks his disciples, who do others say the Son of Man is? In other words, who do people say that I am? And they're ready with all of the rumors. There's a rumor that you're actually John the Baptist, or that you're actually Elijah or Jeremiah or one of those prophets. That's what people are saying when they talk about you. And you can kind of read between the lines those expectations. They have expectations that you have the words of prophecy or you have a special purpose. But they're just guessing. So then Jesus says, okay, I hear that, but who do you say that I am? You, my closest friends, my companions, who walk with me every day, who see me at my lowest to see me at my highest, who do you say that I am? I don't think the world out there, I don't think society or your workplace is necessarily going to be great at telling you who you are, but those closest to you might be. How often do we ask our spouses and our best friends or our parents or our kids, what do you see in me? Who did God make me to be? And that's what I hear Jesus asking. And there it is, his chief disciple, Simon Peter, pipes up with an answer. And Peter gets it wrong a lot. In fact, he gets it wrong pretty quickly after this, if you keep reading in the gospel, and receives a harsh rebuke from Jesus. But in this moment, he's got it. He's got that answer directly from God, and he says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. I see you for exactly who you are." And in a world that isn't really all that interested in who we exactly are, I think we need to hone in on that sometimes. We need to ask those who are closest to us, and furthermore, I think we need to ask that question back to Jesus. Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Well, we may join in with Peter in answering that question, and we do in our worship and our prayers. "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," and Jesus says, "Yes." So then, now what? Maybe it's time for me to ask Jesus the same question. Who do others say that I am? Well, Jesus might say, "I know what others say about you. I know who they think you are. I know they think that you're a producer or a perfectionist, or that you are defined by your job or your house, where you live, where you go to school, who you vote for. That's what other people say that you are." But Jesus, who do you say that I am? Oh, well, that's different. I hear Jesus saying, "You are a beloved child of God. You are made in my image. You are my brother, my sister, my sibling. You are made of infinite worth. You weren't made only to be human like the world is trying to get you to be, the specific kind of human. You were made to be more than human, made to be superhuman." Look at what he says to Peter at the end of that gospel passage. He said, "Whatever you bind in heaven will be bound on earth. Whatever you loose in heaven will be loosed on earth." Do we afford ourselves that kind of power? I don't think Jesus is just talking to Peter. I think he's talking to all of us. And when we really listen to who Jesus is saying that we are, when we ask him honestly, I think we're blown away by the answer. It's so much more than we ever could have imagined. And Paul echoes that when he says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind," when you hear the truth that Jesus is trying to tell you. Not to be a martyr to the grind. You know, we enter this world as these whole coffee beans, if you will, if you're looking at the cover of the bulletin. But the world can't use that whole coffee bean. The world needs a powder. It'll grind us up into a fine powder, subject us to that process. That system is there to turn us into something it can use, to turn each human into a unit of production for economic purposes. But that is not what Jesus wants. Jesus places ultimate, infinite value on us exactly as we were made, and he knows that we're going to struggle to find that. But he is there with us. He is the ultimate prophet. He is not Elijah. He is not Jeremiah. He's not Isaiah, but he certainly does bring their messages to us in helping us to understand who we really are, helping us to look to the rock from which we were hewn and remember the quarry from which we were dug. Amen.